This is week 72 of the weekly discussions. And this week, we're somewhat revisiting this topic of parenting and radical altruism. EA is an idea and a community focused on using evidence and careful reasoning to find the very best ways to improve the world, and then to act on that basis. And EA is very much about radical altruism. And by this, we mean a couple things more specifically. We'll be talking especially about radical giving, especially to effective charities. We'll be talking about advocacy and demonstration for the world's most important causes, and also high sacrifice career commitment for especially impactful careers. All these can fit. I mean, you can do all these things in a way that isn't especially altruistic, but some of the best ways to improve the world would include many of these things. So I want to ask the question, do parental obligations constrict radical altruism? Or do they enhance radical altruism? In what ways does it do both? And then just briefly touch on a couple of people who I found inspiring as parents and as parental altruists, if you will. And then just move to discussion questions, since as always, the most value from these, I think, are from discussions among ourselves rather than what I have to say per se. And just a disclaimer, of course, I'm just coming at this from my point of view. I am not a parent. And yes, others will have other considerations, and that's very much okay. And when I speak about choosing to have children, this is really shorthand for trying to have children, because many people cannot have children, or only with great effort do they achieve this. So why does this come up? Why might radical altruism affect parenting? And well, it's because I'm talking here about radical altruism. I'll requote Larissa McFarquhar from Strangers Drowning, where she talks about the difference between do-gooders and ordinary people. For do-gooders, it is always wartime. They always feel like they're responsible for strangers. They always feel that strangers, like compatriots in war, are their own people. They know that there are always those as urgently in need as the victims of battle, and they consider themselves conscripted by duty. And so just like a soldier might leave their family to go off to war, someone who is a do-gooder, in Larissa McFarquhar's words, someone who pursues just exceptional radical altruism might make actions or feel the need to do things that do come at familial costs. There's a Christian basis for this sort of thinking as well. And one verse that comes to mind is Luke 14, verse 26, when Jesus is talking about the call to discipleship. He says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. So obviously here there's a tension between parenting and radical altruism. So does it constrict radical altruism? And so reasons, yes, these aren't groundbreaking discoveries, but I just want to touch on finances, on the time, on location, on environment, and on risks that are associated with parental obligations that would restrict radical altruism. We all know that raising kids is expensive. It's more expensive in some places rather than others. If we talk about it financially, a lot of estimates like this one from the USDA puts the cost in the US at $233,000. And I believe that's in present, that's if you were to put it in today's dollars, the net present value of expected future costs of children. And I'm not sure if this includes time costs. I think if it included time costs, it'd be actually much higher. One interesting perspective I heard on this was from Bernadette Young, who's I think she's the wife of Toby Ord. I hope I'm not misspeaking, but she had a really good EA forum post on this, and she makes this comment about how these costs are costs you pay mostly for the first 20, 25 years of the child's life, but you're their parent until you die. So if you were to spread that out across your lifetime, the cost comes out to something like £2,000 or $2,500 per parent per year. So if you were to assume you can extend the cost to raise children into the future, and save a life through highly effective give well top charities at the current rate, then you're talking about a trade-off of something like 50 lives saved for the cost to raise a child. And I don't make this trade-off lightly. I'm not saying it's this simple, but just to put it in a financial perspective. So the other cost, of course, is time and energy. I read this one form a couple years ago, which was showing somebody's schedule and how much time they spend at work and at home and how much free time they have. And they calculated that after they had children, after careful measurement, they realized that they had about 3 hours less every single day because of the time cost of caring for their child. And of course, if you're home with your child, well, it's more than that, right? So very realistically, you're talking several hours a day. You're talking about bandwidth restrictions. You can't do the same things you could before, simply out of time. And maybe you can't do as high pressure or high energy things because, well, if you're getting 4 hours of sleep a night your first year, that's quite difficult to do anything really high mental energy. Then there's a flexibility concern too, right? In terms of your time. But another cost is sure location. When you have children, it's very common to want to move to a family-friendly neighborhood. This looks very similar to the neighborhood I grew up in, typical American suburb. You also have less flexibility to move because once your family has roots and relationships in a place, you can't just uproot the family. Travel becomes more difficult, which again, all these things relate to radical altruism, perhaps in some way, right? Maybe ideally, it would be best to be able to move quickly. Maybe ideally, it would be better to live in a place where housing was less expensive and use some of that money for other purposes. Also, it might even affect where you go to church. If you have children, then my parents did this. They went to a church where there was a good youth program for the whole family. So that was affected as well. But then there's, of course, this environmental aspect where having more children does add more CO2 emissions. Founders Pledge found that this is perhaps by itself the single greatest increase in your contribution to climate change. And for many people, radical altruism includes altruistic commitments to help the environment. And so there's a challenge here, there's a tension. And then I want to mention one other aspect that I don't hear people talk about very much. Let's say you wanted to put on some kind of dangerous protest, or you wanted to take some great risk to speak out for the truth and promote the common good. Let's say you were in Ukraine and you were ready to fight for democracy. Things like this, you just can't quite do as much if you are a parent. This is an image of August Landmesser, and this is a famous photo of him standing up to really the Nazi regime at a Nazi rally, not giving in when everybody else did. And this comes at immense costs. I don't know if he was a parent, but of course, if you have children whose lives are on the line as well, then you can't take as many risks. But do parental obligations enhance radical altruism? There are many reasons why it could. One, deep necessity. There's this deep necessity for many people to have children. And many people may be inspired to radical altruism through their children, through the changing of their values towards caring about humanity in general more, maybe about a particular thing they experience through their children. And then there's also this broad idea that more children and more people equals a better world. So we can discuss in the breakout rooms whether these are things that lead to radical altruism. Maybe these just lead to general altruism, right? But when we're thinking about radical altruism, we often think about not just giving a bit of money to charity, not just taking a slightly better career. We often think of like doing radically better things or more altruistic things, sacrificing considerable amounts of income, making considerable career sacrifices. So yeah, there's this question of whether this does enhance those. And yeah, there's just this deep necessity that many people have to have children. There are many people who are sufficiently drawn to having children that fulfilling this desire is really necessary for helping them fulfill their potential. There are many people who would think or say, if making radical altruistic commitment X, going to this place or giving money away in that proportion, were to imply that I can't have children, then I wouldn't be able to say yes to X from deeply within myself. And I just think this is, for many people, quite plausible, quite true. So um, maybe there's something to be said here. Also, in terms of values, many people say that having children has changed their values in a way that made them care more passionately about humanity and their children's future world. So it just seems like you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. And many people, many people begin to care about the world only after they have skin in the game or like a stake in it. And I think having a child is one way to really, not that I've had a child, but could be one way to really feel connected to other people's children and other people in this world. And then finally, there's this idea that more people in the world equals a better world. And this is sort of an anti-natalist perspective, a pro-natalist perspective. And there are economic arguments for this. One is that, generally speaking, people contribute to the services and goods that are produced in the world, and most people contribute positively to GDP, and that leads to other advances and other things that we care about. There's the scientific idea that we do see continual progress in many ways in science, leading to a better society for many people. This is very much drawing on Steven Pinker's type of thinking, Enlightenment Now sort of thinking, if you're familiar with that. But then there's also this what I think is fundamentally Christian idea that there is goodness in life, and that when God said that the earth was good, and when he created people and said it was good in Genesis, that God was affirming the goodness of humanity's existence. And if we extend that along with this command to be fruitful and multiply, then we do see a biblical case for having more children and more people in this world. And then there's this idea that maybe your children could be like you. I put this in the question because it's certainly not guaranteed, right? And you wouldn't want to put too many expectations on your children. But at the same time, it seems unreasonable to think that your children would be completely unlike you. After all, are you completely unlike your parents? Maybe you are, but most people aren't entirely and completely unlike their parents. And if you are someone you respect, and your spouse is someone you respect, and your children might be like you or your partner, then there's a decent probability that child would be altruistic, or would be someone like you, and hopefully that's a good thing in your eyes. So just a couple of stories. I mentioned these before when we talked about the topic of having children in the future. I realize this is very much turning into the same kind of introduction, but Julia Wise and Jeff Kaufman really debated this idea. These are two effective altruists. They debated this idea of, would being a parent, would this really constrict radical altruism? And they decided to have children. And I just want to say, I think the amount of thought that's gone into them sharing their story has done so much good in the world, so much more good than they could have ever done by donating what they could have saved by not having children. I mean, what Julia has accomplished by sharing her story and keeping track of expenses and her thoughts about having children, I think it's helped many, many people. And I think there's no reason why your life can't be that way as well. But there's also this story of Sue and Hector Hogue, who were mentioned also in Louisa McFarquhar's book, Strangers Drowning, who are Christians, who made parenting their radical altruistic commitment. They ended up adopting about 24 kids, and they did this. They did this as a ministry, as a Christian ministry. Many of these children were disabled, and they knew that if they didn't adopt these children, they would just be forever lost in a foster system that wasn't helping them. And then I want to mention Jay Dykstra as well, who has adopted. He's a Christian in our community, and I think Jay would say that being a parent has really deepened his resolve to take um, radical altruistic commitments, and he's made this a part of his family. He's made it a part of his parenting and his family values as a whole. So it does seem like you can combine radical altruistic commitments and parenthood. So some icebreaker questions. What are some radical altruistic commitments you've been considering in the past? Maybe you're considering earning to give in some way, or some career path that does direct good. And how does your idea of parenting fit in with this? Do you think of it as like a tremendous sacrifice to your goals? The idea of being a parent, do you think this is like a failure in some sense? Or do you feel like, no, there's no tension here? Do you think there are any costs of parenting that I just understated or overstated, or maybe any benefits? And then how does your faith influence your view of parenting? How does being a Christian, and I think most of us would say that about ourselves here, how does that influence your view of parenting?